Thank you very much. I had a whole pandering to Brisbane, putting down Sydney joke, but you stole my thunder on that one, so I can't open with that. Thank you all very much for coming today. I realize it's the after lunch slot. I don't know if you do a lot of public speaking, but this is a punishment slot for speakers. So I don't know what I did to Dave to deserve this, but here I am. What I'm going to talk to you about today is a question. And it's a question that I didn't know to ask. It's a question that once I learned to ask it early on in the development of software, ideas, businesses, changed the way that I look at what I should do and the order in which I should do it. Now there's a speaker trick where they introduce a mystery like this and they wait until the very end to reveal it, and I hate when people do that. So I'm not going to do that. But this question, this initial question, does require a little bit of setup. So I'm going to take you through my thought process of discovering this question as we go along. And as a bonus, well, I guess I have two bonuses. One is I can tell you what's wrong with extreme programming based on this question. The second bonus is I can tell you what's wrong with Facebook based on this question, because I developed my understanding of this by working at Facebook for 7 years, ending in February of this year. And when I got to Facebook, 2011, January 2011, I walked through the door, and what I found was a development culture that was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was seemingly chaotic, like people seemed to be doing stuff at random, and yet it was working. New features, innovative features were coming out, user growth was continuing, the site stayed up through tremendous, unprecedented growth. The whole shift to mobile is a fantastic business story that deserves a talk all of its own. But that all happened in the blink of an eye at a scale that I'd never seen before. So I came in seeing this odd but seemingly functional work culture, engineering culture, and thought what I need to do is understand what in the world is going on first. I need to preserve this because mean reversion is going to kick in at some point. At that point, Facebook had 2,000 employees and 700 engineers. And the pull to go back to more standard style of engineering is going to be very strong. So I need to understand this, I need to preserve it, and I need to enhance it because there is going to be tremendous growth. And indeed, by the time I left, there were 5,000 engineers and something like 25,000 employees total. So the company had grown tremendously in that amount of time. And I had some successes and I had some failures in my mission inside of Facebook to preserve, enhance, and explain this crazy engineering culture. So I get there. First thing you do at Facebook, you go through boot camp. When you're hired at Facebook, you're not hired to a particular team. You, as an engineer, you just come into the pool of engineers, and you spend the first 6 weeks doing little diffs, fixing little bugs here and there, pushing code to production to billions of people. Talk about a gut check. Your first push, oh man, you're going to remember that. I remember seeing the message come up on IRC when my first diff went in. Message comes up and says release whatever L7 successfully pushed to 6,300 out of 6,400 servers. I panicked. So I went to the person next to me. I said, what's on the other 100 servers? Doesn't seem to be causing any problems. That was my introduction to scale. things are always going wrong. And as long as the whole stays up and running, it's actually okay. This whole red-green thing that, you know, I made a certain amount of my reputation out of doesn't apply in such a simple and straightforward way when you can have 100 servers with random stuff running on them and it's not a problem. Is that red or green? It's greenish. That's good enough. So, but that's another whole different story. I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. So I get there, and you know, I'm a name. I'm a senior engineer. I want to make my mark on Facebook engineering, and there's all these kids running around doing random stuff. So I thought, you know, we had a hackathon. As part of hackathon, you could sign up to give classes. I thought, this will be fantastic. Because if I want to make my mark at Facebook, I will give a class on test-driven development. Because after all, who wouldn't want to take a class on TDD from me? Sounds good. The class immediately before mine in the sign-up sheet was Advanced Excel Techniques. The class immediately after mine on the sign-up sheet was Argentinian Tango. When the time came to give the class, the Excel class was completely full with a wait list. The Argentinian Tango class, you know what's coming. The Argentinian Tango class was completely full with the wait list, and I had precisely 0 people signed up for my class. Me. I thought, how am I going to do this? Like, how am I going to make my mark on Facebook engineering if nobody's going to listen to me? And I took the scariest decision of my whole career then. I realized the only way I was going to be successful was to forget everything I knew about software engineering and relearn it from scratch just by looking at what the people to my left and the people to my right were doing. Does this need tests? Of course it needs tests. Apparently, it doesn't need tests. Who knew? You know, is this a sequence of small diffs or one big diff? One big? Really? Really? Oh, okay. And so on and so forth. And so instead of, you know, hey, I'm the expert and I'm going to tell you what to do, which would have resulted in me being fired, I was just going to try and do things their way and see how quick I could learn it. And if indeed I could learn enough in the first 6 months not to get fired in the first 6 months. And I ended up having, let me see if I can get the number right, 370 weekly one-on-ones with my manager without being fired. I counted. I was a little unsure pretty much every week, but it worked out. So I spent the first about 1 year of my time there writing code. And one of the things I learned, one of the things I was reminded of is I hate C++. I was not terrifically successful just writing code, especially compared to the people around me. So I had to find a new gig. I had to find something else to do. And my friend Peter Dimov suggested, why don't you, they've talked about this coaching stuff that you do, why don't you start coaching people internally? So I started a coaching program called Good to Great, where I would meet with an engineer for 12 sessions. It's an hour conversation. It was kind of modeled off of my conversations with Ward Cunningham when I was at Tech Labs back 250 years ago, or whatever it was. And I didn't see those kind of conversations, so I thought, let's have these kind of conversations to see if engineers can grow faster. Well, it turns out that those conversations were very helpful to engineers. That's the good news. The bad news is Facebook's a very metrics-driven culture, and number of printed pages of testimonials turns out not to be a metric that communicates very well. Like I literally at the end of a review period, I would have a stack of paper from my students and their managers saying how fantastic that whole the process of coaching had been and what a transformative process it was. But number of printed pages, nobody else was measuring their progress by number of printed pages of testimonials. So I was kind of alone in that. And it wasn't until I had coached for maybe 3 or so years that I had enough students and enough history for HR to go back and look at my students versus their peers and controlling for all possible variables. My students were twice as likely to get promoted in the year following coaching as their peers. Now that's a metric that people could sign up for, promotion velocity. So if you had a 5% chance of getting promoted in a given year, you get coaching for me now, you have a 10% chance of getting promoted. That's a big deal. It's measurable and makes a big difference for people. One advantage of that job was I got to see everything about the Facebook code base. I got to see how lots of different teams worked. And what I discovered was different teams worked very differently. So yes, the user interface developers worked without a lot of automated tests in a way that I would understand them. The Linux kernel team had way more tests and different varieties of tests than I would have written and expected. So yes, it was chaotic, but it was inconsistently chaotic. And the thing about inconsistent chaos is there's a pattern there. You just haven't seen it yet. Chaos is just chaos. But it's really hard for people to actually sustain actual chaos without flipping real coins. Like there's going to be a pattern someplace. Okay, so I spent most of my time at Facebook coaching engineers. I ended up coaching probably 200 engineers total. I wrote classes that were taken by thousands more of them. I ran a coaching program that put together senior engineers who got coaching training with junior engineers that ended up coaching several hundred more engineers. So it was a good run. Now, one of the things I've always done in my career is I've got a bunch of ideas percolating in the back of my head at any given time. You never know what's going to pop up, so I just want to have a whole bunch of stuff loaded in there. And a few years previous, I had listened to a podcast, an Econ Talk podcast. Any other Econ Talk listeners here? Lots of fun. Economics, lots of fun. You usually don't say those two things together like that. So they were talking to Nassim Taleb, and he made the point that there's a big difference between two styles of payouts. And unfortunately, he calls them convex and concave, which are really hard. I mean, it took me 6 years to figure this out. I'll show you in a second. So they're not great names for them, but here's the essential difference. If you make a small investment, and most of the time you lose everything, but every once in a while you get a huge payoff. This is called convex. And if you're in a convex world, you want to make lots of bets because most of them aren't going to pay off. And you really don't want to be in the position of not having any payoff at all, because then you're kind of out of the business, and that's no good. You want to, if you can have more experiments for the same amount of money, then you've made a big improvement, because you change your chances of getting one of these great big payoffs. And the reason this is called convex is, and this is what took me 6 years. I'm terrible at this spatial reasoning. It took me 6 years to figure out if you draw a little person right here, and they look this direction, then this curve is convex to them. Makes sense. Took me 6 years to figure that out. You guys are way smarter than me. All right. So in a convex world, there's a certain kind of behavior that makes sense. So contrast that with a world where you have very large investments. And most of the time you have a small payoff, and then every once in a while you lose a whole bunch of money. So this is the concave world. In a concave world, you want to move this payoff up just a little bit, because that makes a huge difference in the payoff of this curve. And you'd like to reduce the chances of a total failure, because that's what's really expensive, is those failure moments. And again, if you draw a little person right here and they look up this direction, there's a concave curve. 6 years, go figure. If you're in a concave world or convex world, it's very important distinguishing which of those you're in. If you have nothing to lose, you behave one way. If you've got tons to lose, you try not to lose it, first of all, and then to enhance it a little bit if you can. There's a very different mindset between the two. So I'd heard this podcast. I couldn't figure out where the little person stood, so I was still confused about which was which, but I put that in the back of my head. So that's rattling around. The second trigger for this question that I'm going to tell you about in very short order now. The second trigger was the return of the waterfall. Have you seen the return of the waterfall? Who here has seen people actually advocating, let's design exactly what we're going to do first? Recently. Yeah. Australia is like a cussing place, right? The fuck? I saw smart, I'm not going to cuss anymore, I promise, probably. But really, what other reaction is appropriate? I saw really smart people advocate for, well, they didn't call it a waterfall. They called it, let's do a thorough market survey before we start, because we want to understand the landscape before we begin. And then we'll do a business model refinement, careful business model refinement. And then we will draw exactly what the product's going to be. And then there's some implementation stuff, but like we have programmers for that. And then the only refinement was you have the users test it. There's no QA, right? This is a new world. But it's the waterfall, just with no testing. And I had that reaction. I said, this is the waterfall. It doesn't work for well understood reasons. The difference between 30-year-old Kent and 50-year-old Kent is 30-year-old Kent said, what a bunch of morons. 50-year-old Kent said, what a bunch of morons. But what's going on here? And I remembered these two ideas, right? Ideas, usually it's two ideas bumping together, right? There's no new ideas, but there are new combinations of ideas. So I had this memory of the convex and concave curves, and I thought, oh, this is an attempt to deal, the waterfall-y stuff is an attempt to deal with a concave situation. All that careful, thoughtful analysis is there to avoid losing. It's not there to try to maximize winning. Now, it doesn't work because feedback, but the people advocating for that style of development aren't idiots. They are actually solving a problem that's not in my wheelhouse. Like, I like exploring new ideas. I'll know I'm finished with an idea the first time somebody says, that might work. That's the end of my involvement with the idea. I have to drop it and go to the next one where everybody goes, no, this is crazy. This is never going to work. That I'm in my wheelhouse at that moment. I'm deep in this convex world. I just love those crazy, crazy ideas. Side note, the new product development in this style, it's not convex or concave. It's a large investment with this kind of payoff. Right? That's why it doesn't work. You have a very small chance of a very small payoff if you try and develop waterfall style. So that came to me after I did my practice run in Sydney, so I could give you the good one here. Okay, little pandering, just a little pandering. Okay, so I showed those two curves. I started talking about, well, how would you develop in a convex world versus how would you develop in a concave world? And you can see some pretty odd videos on Facebook of me with really long hair on the sides, none on top, in the top of a tree house. It's a long story, but it involves goats, which I'll probably get back to. I started talking about this, and my friend Thiago Hirai said, you know what? You could put those curves together. I thought, and I did, and this question popped into my head. And here's the question. The question is, what do you have to lose? That's the first question I need to ask when I'm deciding how I'm going to operate. What do I have to lose? And it's a legit question. Sometimes you don't have anything to lose, and you should behave one way. But if I have a lot to lose, I should behave in a very, very different way. So here's how this goes. I am, let's say, I'm looking for a new source of value. So I try an experiment. It doesn't work, but I learned something. I try another experiment. It still doesn't work. I try something else. Doesn't work. Something else. Another. And then I try an experiment that looks just like all the other experiments that I have just tried. But for some reason, people react completely differently to what I just did. So an example of this from my career is JUnit, which I've told this story a bunch of times. Eric Gamma and I got on an airplane in Vienna, flying to Washington, D.C. to go to Uppsala in Atlanta. He knew about Java. I knew about XUnit. We were going to program until the batteries died. And it went well. When we landed, we took what we'd done and we handed it to Martin Fowler. The next day, we had 30 people tracking us down, desperate to get a copy of this program we'd written. This was not normal behavior. Each of us had written lots and lots of programs, just, 3 hours worth of programs. It was the first time that people were demanding to get their hands on this program. That's what exploration is like. You try this, you try that, you learn a little something, you do a little something, you try something else, and then you do something that's seemingly just like everything else you've done, but you found one of these growth loops. The goal of exploration is finding this reinforcing loop where the more you grow, the easier it is to grow more. So, classic examples, the telephone exchange. The more people connected to the telephone exchange, the more valuable it is for the next person to be connected to the exchange. That's a growth loop. Exploration is the search for a new growth loop like that. And it's not a rational process. You can't predict where that next loop is going to be, because if you could, somebody else would have already done it. Somebody else with a bunch of money would have already done it, and you'd be out of luck. So you have to try putting two crazy ideas together. You know, like, let's make a messaging system, and instead of saving all the messages forever and making them searchable and valuable, we're going to throw all the messages away after 24 hours. This is the stupidest idea for a messaging system ever. Snapchat, right? They took those two ideas, they put them together. Wow, for some reason that took off. So exploration, you're trying stuff. Oftentimes the idea that takes off is going to be absurd. Laughter is a really good sign in exploration, where you go, you know, if only we could just rip out the thing and replace it with the other thing, and everybody's ah ha ha ha. Then there's this moment of like nervous, like, well, how hard would that be? And that's the key question in exploration. How hard would it be to try it? You need to try these crazy ideas, because if it's not a crazy idea, if it seems like a crazy idea, but it turns out not to be a crazy idea, then you have unique value. No one else is stupid enough to be a competitor for a bad idea. Woot! I mean, you do have to try out a lot of bad ideas and discard them, but that's where that question of how cheap would it be to try this comes in. TDD. Stupid idea. Clearly stupid idea. You want test passing. Why would you write them before you write the code when you're sure they're going to fail? Just wait. Relax, man. This is dumb. Wait until the code's written and then write the test. Why would you jump? Well, turns out there's lots of good reasons to write the test before you write the code. But that was one where I literally laughed out loud. I thought about this reversal. How hard is that to try? Took me half an hour, and I went, oh. All that anxiety about, is the code really still working? You know, what am I going to do with my next step? How am I going to implement all this all at once? Oh, yeah, I don't have to implement all this. And it worked out great. But it started with laughter. So that's exploration. Exploration is a game. It has rules. It has a certain set of trade-offs. A lot of long-term, short-term trade-offs tilt way towards short-term. Do you know this? This is the international gang sign for trade-offs. Literally, there are places in Palo Alto you can walk down the street and you go like this, and people go, yeah, we're cool. Okay, so the trade-offs all balance towards short-term. So filthy hacks are celebrated in exploration. Because you don't care about sustainability, you're going to throw it away anyway. If you don't throw it away, it's so valuable you kind of don't care. So that's exploration. But let's say now we've done something and it's blown up and it's much bigger than anything else that we've done before. The game changes. The trade-offs change. Before, in exploration, the opposition is indifference. Nobody cares about your idea. Oh, now people care about the idea. Now is the question of scaling. Can we grow this fast enough? And the game, as I said, changes, and now you start encountering barriers to growth. Uh-oh, we're running out of money. Raise some money. Okay, now we're running out of floor space. Now we can't recruit fast enough. Now network bandwidth. Now something else. Now something, okay. The thing about expansion is that each of the crises is existential. So this is like Hercules and the Seven Labors. Hercules and the princess want to get together. Daddy King says, no way. You have to do 7 things, Hercules, all of which are impossible. If you miss any one of the things, no princess. That's what expansion's like. You can get way up that curve, fail the last test, and not have a successful business, even though it looked like you were growing like crazy, but you never turned that corner to having a sustainable business. So in exploration, it's all about economies of scope. How little work can I do in order to validate some question. If we switch this with that, how will users behave? Okay, the clock is ticking. How quickly can we get an empirical answer to that question? Expansion is about economies of risk. So all of a sudden, you have plenty of money available. You're looking at your 100% month-on-month user growth, and venture capitalists are happy to pile in that wouldn't have called you 2 weeks ago. Capital is suddenly cheap, but risk is really expensive. So anything you can do in expansion to reduce risk, you do. If that means throwing money at problems, it's fine, because what you're going to eventually make is going to pay for all of the shortcuts you take in expansion, for sure. Expansion is its own engineering discipline. There were a whole group of people at Facebook whose entire job consisted of listening at lunch in the cafeteria. And if they heard somebody talking about some intractable technical problem, they'd walk over and go, oh, well, I know everything there is to know about this rack switch. You tell me more about why your rack switch is catching fire. So they would go from, well, literal fires sometimes, fire to fire, applying their technical wizardry to get through the barriers to growth, the technical barriers to growth. But it's a different discipline, different engineering discipline. It's a different management discipline. Exploration is all about learning and creativity and coverage of the space. Expansion is about finding the next thing that's going to kill you, because something is going to kill you, and then making sure it doesn't, and then finding the next thing that's going to kill you, because it's one thing after another. If you don't notice that you've made this transition, you're going to have a really bad day, because you're going to continue experimenting and trying loosey-goosey, a little this, a little that. Meanwhile, your systems are failing, users are unhappy, they go someplace else, and you've just lost a fantastic opportunity. So it's a little like you start out playing soccer, you're kicking the ball, you finally figure out the rules of the game, you figure out what the opposition is. The person with the black and white stripes blows the whistle and comes out with this strange oblong ball, and a bunch of big, hairy, sweaty guys comes out. If you keep playing soccer when there's a rugby ball on the field and a rugby team in the opposition, is not going to go very well. That's what happens when you don't make that explore to expand transition. You can't be playing the previous game with the previous strategy and be successful. Expansion is very focused. It's a short period of time. That's the time where extra hours makes a difference. That's the time where sitting in the same room makes a huge difference. It's not a lot in terms of the time of an entire project. It's not a big percentage. But that's the time everybody needs to be on the same page, working on the same problem, understanding the situation in the same way. Okay, let's say we managed to avoid death 6 different ways. And now it's time. Now we can start making predictions. We say, we see every user we add is going to be this many more servers, and we can start making projections. And now, again, the game changes. We start extracting value. We continue to grow, but in a more orderly, predictable kind of fashion. So you continue to grow. You have, this is where you have playbooks. You know, like, okay, we're going to introduce the product to the 20th country. Well, there's a playbook. It's about execution. You got to know what the problems are. You got to execute ruthlessly on them because you know what to execute. Again, though, that set of constraints is very different. This is where long-term kicks in. This is where refactoring is super valuable. This is where automated testing pays off, because you have a long-term for the long-term payoffs to play out. but again, is a very different style of engineering, different style of management, different style of finance. This is where KPIs make great sense in Extract, because you've got a lot of data. You can say, your job is to come in on Monday, and by Friday, this number needs to go up by 4%, and be right. If you're in exploration, working against KPIs makes no sense whatsoever. You don't even know what the number is, much less what a reasonable amount for it to go up or down. I talked to teams at Facebook who were doing exploration inside of Extract teams, and all very metrics driven. They said, well, it's crazy, because either my projects make 0 progress on the metrics or 100 times as much progress as I promised. One of the two. It really is binary. That exploration's binary. Expansion is, there's one number that's going to kill us if we don't make it better. And extraction is where you can have a balanced scorecard, you can make continued progress. So let's say you've gone through this curve once, and you've been successful. Now the tricky bit starts. And the tricky bit is, can you run exploration projects and extract projects in the same organization at the same time? This is what Facebook did a fantastic job of circa 2011 when I got there. It's more complicated as a manager than just having, okay, well, everybody has KPIs and then they're all going to be judged the same way. Well, we'll have one set of statistics for our football match and our rugby match. Makes no sense. They're different games. They're different opponents. There's different structure. There's different trade-offs. You can't come up with the single set of metrics that would make sense to improve the play of a soccer team and a rugby team. Doesn't make any sense. The third thing Facebook did, so you'll notice, Explore is the convex part, Extract is the concave part, and the other thing Facebook did really well is they had this group of expanders floating around, and I've talked to some of the early people and gone over this model with them, and they said, yes, I was the expander. I just loved diving into some situation where nobody had ever tried to do this to this piece of equipment before. It was failing in ways that the vendor didn't even have any idea what was going on, and I was the wizard who fixed it. And then I would do it again. And so the expansion projects trump everything. Right? In Explore, you have a small chance of a big payoff. In Extract, you have a big chance of a small payoff. In Expand, you have a large chance of a large payoff. Doesn't last very long. If you miss it, if you miss your opportunity, you miss the most valuable part of software development as a business. So let's say you're an extractor, you get paid $1 million, you're going to return the company $10 million. Everybody thinks, oh, this is fantastic. Then the day comes when some new feature is causing everything to break. And your manager needs to say to you, to encourage you, you need to go work on that. I mean, in the Facebook style, you would just say, I'm going to work on that. Somebody else is going to have to fill in making my $9 million for the company. But somebody else is going to have to do it. Even though that new feature is not, it doesn't have revenue attached, it's not paying off big, but just the fact that something's blowing up means that there's potential there. So the organization needs to run Explore projects with little bits of capital, Extract projects with strict accounting, ROI, lots of metrics, and when something starts to grow rapidly, anyone who can help with that expansion needs to jump in on it, regardless of what their other responsibilities are. That is a really complicated landscape to manage, but if you're sitting atop the biggest business opportunity in the last 15 years, it's the only way you can continue to innovate and execute at the same time that I've seen. And that's what made Facebook development for so many years to such a large scale work effectively. is that different projects were treated very, very differently. Now, you can't be Facebook. You don't want to be Facebook now. A couple years ago, maybe you wanted to be Facebook, but nobody wants to be Facebook now. So here's the explanation for how this went bad. And this is my explanation. I see chaotic stuff. I want to make sense of it. That's what I do. Sometimes I'm right. Sometimes I'm just making sense of things, and it's not a good explanation. But this is how I think about it. At Facebook, everybody's managed on impact. What's your number? How much does it need to go up in the next 6 months? At the beginning of 6 months, you say, okay, I'm going to increase the number of comments on cat memes by 3%. Okay, super. So you try some stuff, and you increase 4% the comments on cat memes, and then you're a really good person. You only increase it 2%, not so good. You don't increase it at all, we have a serious discussion. So that's the model. You have some numerical target, and you got 6 months to achieve it. When Facebook as a whole was in explore and expand, this made a lot of sense. That style of development, of management and performance review makes a lot of sense. In exploration, what it means is your incentives are to try a bunch of little things to make this better. And as long as you can try and experiment every week, well, something's going to work out. Something that you do is going to work out. So you have a good chance of making your goal or even exceeding it. You know, the best position you can be in is you get your 4% at the end of the first month, and then you can start going crazy and trying really wild stuff. So it works well to focus everybody's attention on the opportunities. Now you go into expansion. Again, this kind of focus on impact works really well. I want all of you to be looking for those bottlenecks, to find the next thing that's going to kill our growth, and to go out proactively and say, well, this was growing and it was going to exceed our ability, our capacity, and I brought the growth rate down, and I saved $100 million. Super, fantastic. Again, you have this priority problem. You have a million things going on. How are you going to get everybody looking for the most important thing to do? If you're expanding, this 6-month cycle and specific numerical goals gives you an incentive to look for a problem to solve. What happens in extraction? Now, those improvements get smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, it's not possible to increase cat meme comments by 4% in 6 months. Now, maybe it's only reasonable to expect them to go up by 0.1%. So you try out a few things. At the same time, though, projects are getting longer and longer, right? You're in extraction. The company's bigger. Your cat meme comment might interfere with somebody else's cat meme likes, thumbs up, and no, there's no thumbs down. Never going to be a thumbs down. Stop asking. Your two metrics may be in conflict. So you're trying to get your plus 0.1%, and you're trying to get your plus 1%. So things start taking longer and longer. You can do fewer experiments in the 6 months. Now you start seeing people game the system. They're trying desperately to get their improvement out there. Now, what happens if you do something not exactly evil, but maybe you just don't think through the consequences of what you're doing so carefully? Because you've tried this experiment, it seems like it's going to work. You're going to be good for your code review. You have no incentive to look at the downsides of what you're just doing. So, for example, you'll see Facebook apps will get this pile of new features, and they'll get really complicated. That's because everybody who's introducing a feature wants their feature to ship to everybody so that they can justify their existence for another 6 months. The upside, the incentives are all around the upsides of those. The fact that they all share, a palette of commands and it gets longer and longer and longer, this is nobody's really their responsibility. And no one has the incentive to say, well, I have this feature, it's a little marginal, maybe I'm not sure how people are going to use it, so I'm not going to ship it. That's just suicide, career suicide at Facebook. Because the incentives are all about looking at the upsides, even though the upsides, you get diminishing returns on the upsides, and nobody's incentives are about looking at the potential downsides, especially the potential downsides of this feature crossed with that feature. Like, that's not on anybody's radar. So it's just not looked at. At some point in this curve, you need to go from focusing on impact, outcomes, measurable outcomes, to focusing on good decision making. So if I have a feature, it doesn't make that big a difference, it's going to make the palette of options too big, I'm not going to ship it, and that's the right decision for all the users of the app. At some point, you have to be able to say, super, good decision, thank you very much, you did what's right for the company, the users, society as a whole. And I don't think Facebook's ever going to make that transition. This focus on impact is so strong, number one, and the fear of politically savvy people getting power is so strong, right? That's what impact is there for. We don't want people who just talk a good game and can't execute. Okay, but the flip side is you get these phantom improvements that have individually, right? There's thousands of features going into all of Facebook every 6 months. Individually, the probability that any given feature is going to introduce a privacy problem or elect a fascist or whatever is very, very small. But there's so many features, and they interact in unexpected ways. They're used by such a large percentage of the world's population that, in my view, it's inevitable that there's going to be an increasing set of problems with Facebook. And structurally, the reform that it would take to address that, going from evaluating impact to evaluating quality of decision making, it's just never going to happen. So that's my explanation for why Facebook has seen this series of problems, and I expect them to continue. The question, though, remains, what do I have to lose? That question and how we manage our response to that question, that has fundamentally changed the way that I look at not just software development, but lots of other things. So Twitter is, for example, where I explore. I came out of 7 years of Facebook, kind of didn't know of all the things I'm interested in talking about, what are people interested in hearing me talk about? Twitter is where I explore that, because it's very cheap to experiment. So if I have a thought, I put it on Twitter, as long as it's not patently stupid or offensive. Not that I always know whether it's going to be offensive, but that's a separate set of issues. I just try it out, and indeed, the magnitude of response to things that I tweet is 20 to 1. Like, lots of stuff gets like this many reactions, and every once in a while I'll say something and it gets 20 times the response. And at the moment that I press tweet, I don't know which this one is going to be. I can't predict it. I have to just try it. Compare that with I'm going to go into a cave and write the book on software development, carefully think about it, and then release it, and then discover nobody cares. I can discover that nobody cares about one of my ideas in a matter of seconds. I don't have to put all that effort into it. My SoundCloud page, same kind of thing. I'm a musician. I'd like to play music that people want to hear. What do people want to hear? I can't predict it. My best strategy is just press record on my phone, do this kind of song, put it up there, press record, do this kind of song, put it up there, and see, and indeed, I have one piece on SoundCloud that's 5 times as played as anything else. Absolute numbers are really, really tiny. I'm not quitting my day job. Not that I have a day job, but that's a separate set of issues again. But if I'm in explore mode, I don't want to analyze. I want to figure out how to experiment. When something's growing, I want to find out what the barrier to growth is and address it and get ready for the next one. And for the parts of my career that are in extraction, I want to think about how can I make a little improvement? How can I sell this business to somebody else because I hate extraction? That's just my personal preference. But the rules change depending on where I am in that cycle. And the fundamental mistake XP made was it tried to be a set of rules for the entire curve without recognizing this question. So should you write tests? Depends. You have anything to lose? No. Well, only write the tests that help you experiment quicker. I can't answer all the, no estimates. No estimates is a great idea in exploration because you've never done it before. So estimate is just guess. And it doesn't add any value. It's wasted effort, so don't do that. But if you're in extraction and you're not estimating, you're missing out on important information for making decisions about, do I do project A or project B? I have the data to make fairly confident estimates. I should use that data, that experience to decide ROI of this versus ROI of that. So it changed the way that I look at software development, changed the way that I look at my career development, the way that I look at audience development, and I'm still figuring out what all it really does mean. That's my prepared information. I think I'm finishing a few minutes early. I got tons more stories, but you're not going to be here for another 6 hours. So